Okay, so we start part two, the Act Two, Scene One, with the description of the exterior of the farmhouse. And it's important aspects of the setting here are that it's a hot Sunday afternoon, 2 months later. So there's been time for these relationships and these conflicts that O'Neill establishes in the opening of the play to kind of fester. And I think that's a kind of appropriate word for what goes on in this. Abby is dressed in her best and is discovered sitting in a rocker at the end of the porch. She rocks listlessly, enervated by the heat staring in front of her with bored, half-closed eyes. So again, in the way that Ephraim seems to be dressed in his dismal Sunday clothes earlier on in the play, here she is wearing the same type of clothing, but seems completely at odds with the religious rigidity that that clothing seems to demand from her. And so we wonder about the purpose of this. Is it to impress, or is it because she's actually drained of purpose by her church going experience? She's enervated by the heat, so she's in this place of this moment of sapped vitality, the concept with which she is so consistently associated throughout the play of I guess the vital impulse of nature has been sort of drained from her, I think, and the implication is that the experience at church has carried this out. She's also staring with bored, half-closed eyes, which is an important revelation of her emotional state. At that moment in time, she seems, I think, to have a sense of perhaps lost focus. There's a lost sense of purpose in her body language and her physicality here, because she is, I think, channeling her existence into an avenue, the kind of Apollonian avenue of Ephraim, the religious self-abnegation that is so at odds with her. I think the essence of her being, she is all vital essence. She is all deep connection with nature, and she is impulse and passion. And so this connection to religion and theology is effectively sapped, I think, from her. Aben then enters the scene, sticks his head out of his bedroom window and looks furtively and tries to see or hear if anyone's on the porch. But although he's been careful to make no noise, Abby has sensed his movement. So again, we have this vocabulary, I think, of compulsion, of an absence of control in the way in which these two characters relate to each other. And so that connection between them is well established here in the stage directions, that they both connect with each other in a realm that is beyond the facility of their sort of rational minds. She stops rocking and her face grows animated and eager. So this is the contrast, this is the re-establishment of her vitality and purpose that she's missing in the opening of the scene, that just the presence of Aben and the sense of her impulsive sexual compulsion, I think, towards him is what ultimately re-establishes that sense of purpose. Aben then seems to feel her presence. He scowls back his thoughts of her and spits with exaggerated disdain. So again, he is couched in this language of sensation that is beyond the conscious mind, and I think then is actively trying to destroy that sense of compulsion by spitting with exaggerated disdain. So there's this conscious effort to repel her, to see her as something outside of his life and his motives, that I think is because he has internalized the concept of rival maternity, that she is in some way a rival for his material resources and is simply a rival, therefore, to his ma, and not an expression of his connection with the maternal, which she later becomes. He then withdraws back into the room, and Abby waits, holding her breath, as she listens with passionate eagerness for every sound within the house. So, listening with passionate eagerness, there's almost a kind of a paradoxical quality to this, that you are in this passive role of inaction, and yet fulfilling that role with emotional intensity and passion. And that, I think, captures again that sense of almost fatalistic compulsion that drives the two characters together, that they are destined to be driven towards each other because of their, the way in which they allow these forces beyond them to communicate with each other, that they are a re-establishment of the vital connection between man and nature, and between a son and the maternal quality of his Oedipal impulses. Aben then comes out and their eyes meet, and again, the description implies that there's a lack of control over this meeting of glances. His falter, he is confused. He turns away and slams the door resentfully. Very frequently when he is experiencing this compulsion to be attracted to Abby, he experiences internal conflict, because at this stage, early on in the play, he has this internal conflict because he is still conceiving of her mentally as a rival, as conflict, as a source of conflict, and as a source of competition. At his gesture of kind of refusal, Abby laughs tantalizingly, amused, but at the same time piqued and irritated. So she, I think, laughs because she senses her control, but also senses that it is not at this moment in time working fully. She expects to be able to kind of dominate proceedings because she has this ability to compel Aben and his behavior. He scowls as he continually does and strides off the porch to the path and starts to walk past her to the road with a grand swagger of ignoring her existence. And again, there's something paradoxical about this, that you can have a grand swagger about something that you're ignoring. That grand swagger implies a sense of deliberate, conscious performativity that, by definition, sort of kind of precludes the possibility of ignoring someone's existence. If no one is watching, why are you then performing? And so that paradox there is showing us again his internal conflict, that he is trying to communicate that she has no control over him, and yet by doing so, I think, betrays the fact that she is able to compel him in some way. He is dressed in his store suit, spruced up. His face shines from soap and water. So he is, shoehorned into this, performance of the respectful Sunday best. But Abby leans forward on her chair, her eyes hard and angry now, and as he passes her, gives a sneering, taunting chuckle. So this sense of rivalry is huge at this moment in time, and she, I think, wants to provoke him because it's this kind of almost like a kind of playground flirtation between kind of grade 9, 14-year-olds, that she wants to provoke him because it guarantees that he will be forced to interact with her in some way. Aben is stung by this taunting chuckle and turns on her furiously. So the intensity of his feeling, the intensity of his passion and emotion is immediately apparent. And he says, "What are you cackling about?" And again, he kind of villainizes her with that vocabulary, makes her sound kind of witch-like. And she triumphant says, "You." She's got this constant sense of victory. She lords it over him at this moment, and she's right, that she has an enormous amount of power over him. And she criticizes him. "You look all slicked up like a prize bull." So again, he is animalized. He is turned into this kind of farmyard animal in the same way that they very frequently describe, that O'Neill describes Simeon and Peter. They're turned into this livestock, and so is he here. And I think it's part of his, his false engaging in the pretense of religious commitment, and I think the simile itself taps into this idea of materialism, that somehow he's putting on his best in order in some way to kind of make a sale, make a price, which obviously going through the motions with his father's religious beliefs is purely motivated by his desire for some kind of inheritance. And then Aben, with a sneer, says, "You ain't so darn purty yourself, be you?" Again, the misunderstanding is important here, that he seems to think that she's criticizing his sort of attractiveness and his appearance. But actually what she seems to be criticizing, I think, is his falsity, his inauthenticity. And so, therefore, this sense of misunderstanding between them is something, again, that is developed as the scene goes through, this sense of actively trying not to understand each other in Aben's case, because understanding him gives Abby, I think, an amount of power over him. They stare into each other's eyes, and they do this an awful lot. They're constantly looking at each other, and his held by hers in spite of himself. He is being compelled by her, even though he really, at this moment in time, does not want to be. Hers glowingly possessive. And so the contrast there is important, that her eyes are animated by that same possessive streak that they all seem to exemplify at the beginning of the play. But here, I think the possession is of him. He is being subject to that possessive impulse that ultimately he experiences with the farm, and that he has inherited partly through through a genetic connection, and partly through the experience of being brought up by a frame. His possessive impulse is strong. Their physical attraction becomes a palpable force quivering in the hot air. And this is where the stage directions are so much like Williams, where O'Neill almost, he can't resist making it explicit. The unspoken element of their compulsion towards each other becomes explicitly communicated, that it becomes a palpable force. And so that here, he very directly in the stage directions embodies this sort of abstract force, this kind of tragic compulsion towards one another that occurs in their behaviour. Abby then says, "You don't mean that, Aben. You may think you mean it, maybe, but you don't. You can't. It's against nature, Aben. You've been fighting your nature ever since the day I come, trying to tell yourself I ain't party to you." So again, the sense of compulsion that is evident in these lines, I think, is important, because Abby here is aware of it. She is the character at this point in time that seems to actually understand this. So she is conscious of their being compelled by nature or force beyond their control. And she knows that she is on that side. She is almost the representative of that. And so I think there's an element of potential comparison here with Stanley Kowalski in Streetcar, that she is aware that she is basically on the rising tide. She is a participant in forces greater than herself that are likely to succeed. And here it's the compulsion of sexual attraction, whereas for Stanley it is, I think, his raw animal sexual attraction as the representation of a fairly crude, vulgar ideology of materialism and economic supremacy. She says, "I ain't purty to you," and she laughs, a low, humid laugh, without taking her eyes from him. So this focus, at the same time that she's confident, she is still relentlessly focused on Abe, and she won't give that up, and her body squirms desirously. And importantly here, the body is an expression of this kind of powerful desire. And so, although this isn't necessarily at odds with the language that she uses, it's a sort of direct confirmation of what she says. There is this enormous sense, I think, of the physicality of her behaviour in the stage directions, communicating the authenticity of this powerful, tragic compulsion that drives the two of them together. And I think then she moves into this slightly seductive language that at the same time is quite transcendental and is trying to invoke this sort of force of natural vitality that I think she is deliberately represented as being the sort of embodiment of this force, but at the same time is trying to sort of seduce Aben into an embrace of this natural vitality that is figured in the play as being something Dionysian. She says, "You can feel it burning into the earth, nature. It's got this intense sensual reality, making things grow bigger and bigger, burning inside you, making you want to grow into something else." I think, there's a kind of bizarre sort of phallic connotation to this particular image about, in physical passion creating growth inside of a man. There's this bizarre sense of natural vitality almost exploding outwards. But importantly, it's making you want to grow into something else till you're joined with it, making you want to be transcendent and to transform your identity by virtue of the connection with a force that is beyond your control. So she really is voicing this sort of Dionysian transcendence that she sees. I think O'Neill deliberately figures her as the embodiment of that. But they only are fully embracing that Dionysian transcendence and natural vitality. At the point, I think, whereby they care more about their compulsion towards each other than they do about their materialistic claims to the farm. Later down, she said, it owns you too, and it makes you grow bigger like a tree, like them elms. And she laughs again. He takes a step towards her, compelled against his will. Nature will beat you, Aben. And this is where she directly articulates this idea. And that vocabulary is compelled against his will. She knows she is on the side of these powerful forces of natural vitality that are almost the kind of embodiment of destiny. That she is on that side. She is the mouthpiece for these phenomena. And he inevitably, because of the force of these compulsions, will end up having to submit to them, having to lose his sense of self, and ultimately submit to that sense of interpersonal compulsion. You might as well own up to it first as last. And then he says, trying to break from her spell confusedly. The power over him is extremely evident here, and O'Neill uses this language of a spell, I think, to give us this, I think, almost sort of slightly misogynistic sense of feminine witchcraft. That the male attraction to a woman is necessarily something that they can't deal with in their rational mind because it's the feminine. The feminine, by virtue, has this sort of supernatural power to control the rational faculties of a man. And even though that connection between Aben and Abby is something that O'Neill, I think, ultimately sees an alternative to the crude Apollonian materialism of a frame, there's still a sense here, I think, a sort of almost a suspicion of Abby's sort of power in this dynamic between the two characters, and that's why we have this sort of language that I think deliberately makes it sound almost like a kind of witchcraft, even though at the same time it's supposed to be beyond her control. She said, if Pa'd hear you going on resentfully, but you've made such a damn idiot out of the old devil, and she laughs. So importantly here, she laughs because she knows that she doesn't care about Ephraim, and neither does Aben. And she says this, wait, ain't it easier for you with him changed softer? And he says, no, I'm fighting him, fighting you, fighting for Ma's rights to her home. And so here, he kind of aligns her as a rival to the maternal, which is, I think, in the end, the reason for his later change. He's fighting him. At this moment in time, he sees Ephraim and Abby as the enemy because they are those who are in conflict with his material claim to the farm. And that's the thing that O'Neill eventually celebrates is his relinquishing of that material claim to the farm and his submission to these powerful sources of natural vitality and sexual compulsion that bring him together with Abby in spite of the material interests of perhaps not behaving in that way. Further down, he says, you're aiming to swallow up everything and make it yours. So again, he, I think, sort of explains her sexual passion through the lens, I think, of materialism. He explains what she's doing at this moment in time through the way that he sees her as trying to be greedy, trying to swallow up the material resources of the farm. I think because of that claim, there is an element of truth to that at this point in time. She still hasn't fully relinquished those material claims over the ranch and the farm. And so his accusation there sort of hits home. And then that's the reason for this stage direction. She tries to regain her ascendancy seductively. And so the power play occurs. She knows that she has this kind of sexual compulsion over Aben. But at the same time, I think deliberately tries to cling on to the materialism whilst utilising that sense of vitality and sexual compulsion. She's trying to do both at the same time. And again, I think O'Neill only gives us a sense of approbation for them at the point whereby she actually gives up the material claims and then, I think, commits with integrity to the the vital and the Dionysian. She then tries to conceal a growing excitement. So the fact that he responds to her, he stops, but it's still resentfully, what do you want? She's excited because she knows that she's got him. She's got him at least provoked and engaged, and is attempting to sort of solicit some sort of response from him. Abby then says, what do you want to waste your time on her for? And Aben, revenging himself now, grins at her. So there's this, I think, this sort of almost an interplay of desire between the two of them. That because Aben has realised that she is lording this sense of attraction and compulsion over him so much, he realises that there must be authentic passion at the bottom of this, and then realises that he can do the same thing back. And he does the same, and that's why it says, revenging himself now, grinning at her. You can't beat nature, didn't you say? So he says here, this sexual compulsion that you've basically been provoking in me, there's nothing to say that I can't channel this elsewhere. And so he realizes that desire is based on reciprocity, that it's based on being reciprocal between the two. And then if she has the power over him because of desire, then to the same effect, he has the same power over her. And that's why she's bothered. She bursts out, and this is the first time where she loses composure in this power play that's based on sexual desire, and calls Min an ugly old hake. And that shows us how, I think, deeply affected she is by this. But Aben then taunts her. Tauntingly, he says, maybe, but she's better than you. She owns up fair and square to her doings. And so he here, I think, is forcing both Min and Abby into a role that's based on materialism in his view. Further on, she then furiously says, don't you dare compare me. And she resents this sort of misapprehension of her character and her motives. She unbelievably, she's completely surprised by this comparison, that she's being compared with a prostitute whose entire life is based on that sort of, their professional life, if we're going to call it that, a vocational life, is based on an economic transaction for the exchange of desire, let's say. And he compares Abby's supposed attraction to a frame as a form of prostitution, which, of course, I think in O'Neill's own sort of metaphysics and ethics, it is. It's this. He only is celebratory of this relationship when it results in both of them giving up their material claims. Abby then savagely seizes on his weak point. Yorn, you mean my farm. So she here again resorts to material control and breaks this sort of dialogue that's based on passion. And then he again accuses her of a type of prostitution. I mean the farm you sold yourself for like any other old whore, my farm. So there's this shift, but he constantly provokes her through this connection. And she's upset again by this. She's stung fiercely. You'll never live to see the day when even a stinking weed on it will belong to you. And so her pain drives her back into, I think, falling into this materialism. She knows that really at this moment in time that is her full control over him, because the avenue of passion he is basically taken from her by comparing her to a prostitute. And then she then invokes this sort of conventional language and conventional laws, disgracing your pa and me. I'll get your pa to horsewhip you off the place if I want. So again, she shifts back into orthodoxy and convention, using this sort of language of morality that seems entirely out of place when she's been attempting previously in the scene to provoke his sexual compulsion, and shows that her power over her father is almost the same as it is over him, but uses these sort of animal images to show her sense of control over Aben. Further down, old Cabot appears, coming up from round the barn. The hard, grim expression of his face has changed. He seems in some queer way softened. So there's something, I think, important about this, that he's losing this sort of sense of isolation and rigidity. And it's easing his kind of personal kind of stiffness, because there is some sort of, I think, compulsion for connection with another human being that he has obviously experienced by having 2 months with Abby. His eyes have taken on a strange, incongruous, dreamy quality. So this is most definitely at odds with his previous existence and disconnect him, I think, from that sense of reality and rigidity. And, we think of him in comparison perhaps to Stanley Kowalski. Stanley never has a moment like this where he relinquishes his adherence to rigid, concrete reality. He says, yet there is no hint of physical weakness about him. Rather, he looks more robust and younger. And I think this is partly a suggestion of O'Neill's overall interest in reconciling the Apollonian and the Dionysian. His sense of connection, his sense of emotion and passion has perhaps added to his robustness as an individual. However, he makes that point clearly when he says he looks more robust and younger. Abby sees him and turns away quickly with unconcealed aversion. His presence here destroys this sort of almost telepathic connection that she shares with Aben on the basis of sexual compulsion. And Cabot mildly says, why are you and Aben quarreling again? His immediate question is attempting to invoke this sort of sense of reconciliation between Abby and his son, which I think shows this sort of very incipient sense of a desire for harmony with these people who, we use the term loosely, are the raw materials of any kind of family. But, this falls apart pretty quickly. Cabot then down the bottom says, after a pause, Aben's queer, and Abley bitterly says he's the dead, spitting image of you. And again, that irony is developed, I think, here. Partly through, again, that sense of the way that Abby and Cabot contrast in vision, but also there's this sort of same desire for power in both father and son, but ultimately with different visions of what that constitutes. He shares a materialist streak like his father, but he is definitely much more in touch with his emotional vitality and passion than Ephraim. Cabot says he's so thunder and soft like his ma, about as soft as you be. And of course the language here is incredibly important because thunder and soft is an oxymoron. We don't associate thunder with a conception of softness. And Abby understands this and ironically refers to this by, saying, well, about as soft as you. You think of yourself as this rigid embodiment of self-abnegation. Well, actually, you share a lot in common with your son. You're both rigid and hard. And that irony of Aben's lack of self-awareness is constantly developed. And it's almost a form of dramatic irony here where they have this conversation without his full understanding. Cabot then says, as if he hadn't heard, maybe I've been too hard on him. And I think the reconnection is the reconnection with Aben is purely sort of egotistical. He sort of suggests that he haven't heard this phrase, but he's willing to reconsider Aben on the basis of the fact that he is like him. And this is also, I think, partly figures in the Dionysian Apollonian binary that O'Neill establishes here. It is about, the ego. The ego is on the side of the Apollonian. It's about me. It's about me and the rigid boundaries of my identity. And the fact that Cabot is willing to reconsider Aben based along those lines is partly the product of the fact that Abby seems to have suggested that they're similar, that they have a connection. She then, I think, realizes that there's this reconciliation and attempts to put a gap in between it, and then, basically becomes a lying gossip here. That's what Aben was saying, that he's getting soft now, soft as slop. So she shows that she can manipulate Cabot as well as she can manipulate Aben. And again, it's the feminine character in this play that has this manipulative power because she's the one that is on the side of the forces of fate and destiny. And I think that is a really interesting comparison with Stanley Kowalski because, he is so overtly displayed as sort of archetypally masculine that in the end, that her sort of archetypal femininity brings an interesting contrast on the basis of gender, that both of them are archetypally and physically sort of embodiments of what we would call essentialist gender distinctions, the difference between the genders being based on some fundamental feature of the body and of sexual passion. And yet, really, I think both of them share much more in common with each other by virtue of the power that that essentialist gender distinction gives them.